there's like hardly any hotels, there's nothing really in the town. So we did everything at the Thomas house, but it was really exciting anyways. And then at the time we had a crew member that was a member of the Baptist.
And you didn't mention, I'm banned for life from going to the Bellwitch Cave.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. So anyways, I don't even know what he's going to talk about, but this is going to be exciting because I always love listening to him as well. But without further ado, Kyle Cobb, ladies and gentlemen. Yes.
Can you hear me if I just talk?
Yes. Okay. All right. I know they kept like going out and stuff, so I was like, oh, the batteries are going dead.
I'm a loud guy anyway. So I'm Kyle Cobb. I like to tell people, if you know who I am, you've made some really bad life choices. So I am a demonologist. What does that mean? First of all, unlike a certain television show where the host gets possessed every week, I do not get possessed every week. A demonologist, in short, is I'm someone who researches the history of religion to its earliest points. So I've studied 22 different religions, and I've traveled to 60 countries around the world to do it. And as part of that, I started out as I grew up Southern Baptist, and I converted to Anglican, which is Church of England, a while back. And I didn't understand why Christianity in history, modern Christianity, was different than it was 1,000 years ago, and why it was different than even earlier periods. So the first thing I did when I was on kind of a religious quest was I tried to understand how Christianity evolved over time. And someone 1,000 years ago wouldn't recognize modern Christianity at all. So I studied how it changed over time, and then I went further back, and I said, well, you know, in 1000 AD it changed, but what changed prior to that? And then I went backwards to before the Roman Empire fell, and Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire. And then from there I said, well, okay, now I've gone back to the beginning of Christianity as early as we can. What was the influences there? And so I studied Judaism and its concepts for the Old Testament and how they changed. And one of the things I discovered that they don't tell you these days is when they talk about the tribes of Israel, if you're Christian, you hear the term tribes of Israel? That's a euphemism for the different religions of Israel. So it used to be that while they ethnically may be similar, there were lots of different religions. And that's why, again, from the Christian perspective and the Jewish perspective, when Moses goes up and gets the 10 Commandments, he comes down and they're worshiping the golden calf, right? You may have heard of that. Well, the golden calf, it turns out, is another religion's god. It's their symbol for them. And you see him throughout the Old Testament as a character called Beelzebub, whose real name is Baal, or Baal Hadad. And so, in the case where Moses comes down, they're worshiping another religion's god, because, again, that little sect, one of the tribes of Israel, were Baal worshippers. And he was the most popular god at that point in the entire Mediterranean. Worshipped all the way over from today, would be India, all the way to what's Libya now. And so he was a very popular god. So it starts to make sense. You start to unravel the kind of the little bits of history that are part of it. So what I do is I go back and I look at what the common origins are. And I mentioned the character Baal Hadad. He becomes Beelzebub in the Bible because they take his name. Baal is a title. So Baal means the Lord, and his name is Hadad. That's his name, and you see that throughout history. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that if you were to ask Christians today, what's the name of your God? Sometimes you get crickets. Sometimes they'll say, well, God. Well, no, God's his title. What's his name? If you ask someone Jewish, you may get the answer of Yahweh, or El Shaddai, or one of the various names of God. What happened is, about 200 BC, the Jewish followers of, at that time, the Jewish tribes, like I said, were different religions, but they eventually kind of became one, became monotheists, worshiping a God that they generally refer to today as what we call Yahweh. And what they did is they combined their religious beliefs. That's why in the Genesis, for instance, you find that Adam's wife gets created twice. Once they're made together from the dust of the earth, and the next time Eve is created by the rib. And that's really because there were two different beliefs that were combined, two different holy books that were combined in the Genesis. So that's the kind of thing I do. When someone says, hey, I have someone claiming to be possessed by Beelzebub. Well, I say, okay. First of all, let's talk about who Beelzebub is. And so I'll look and I'll say, okay, you understand the reason he's the bad guy in the Jewish text. It turns out, and this is what Kyle gets involved to do, I research it and I find out, hey, the reason Beelzebub is the bad guy throughout most of the Old Testament, or as Baal throughout the Old Testament, is because his temple was right next to the Jewish temple. And he was the more popular deity that was being worshipped in Jerusalem at the time that the Jews were there. So it was really a competition. They were competing to keep their followers in the Jewish faith, the worshipers of Yahweh, they were trying to keep them from joining all the gods from their respective cult or his religion. So the way you do that is you do what we call today, you demonize him. You make him the bad guy. You do things like your religion, you have special rites like baptism. You have special things like marriage rites. You do things like, if you're Jewish, sacrifice animals. And I want to back up on the sacrifice animals real quick and say, well, that's also something that when we look at. It was common in the early religions, virtually all of them, you would sacrifice your firstborn son to the sky god. And that was what made, in the Bible, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but there's a point where the Jewish God, Yahweh, commands him to commands the sacrifice of his son. And what makes it different from the competing religion of some of the Baals is that he accepts an animal as a surrogate. So that's the kind of thing I get asked to unravel. And what you find out as you go backwards even further in history is that a lot of the modern religious beliefs are also from another religion. So I mentioned earlier baptism is one of the ways we separate Christianity, for instance, from some of the other religions. But it turns out that part of what I specialize in is very old religions. And so when you look at ancient Mesopotamia, which is the oldest writing we can read now, they have the story of a great flood that shows up in the Bible. They also have the very first, and this is where it gets to the demon side, they also have the very first, exorcisms. And they have those actually detailed. And what makes this special, our foundation behind all religions today, a lot of it comes to the Mesopotamians. And they believed that illness was caused by supernatural forces, right? Everything was demons, everything was bad, it was paranormal. And the cool thing is, they were really smart people, and they created what we call a cookbook. They said, well, if you have a headache, you invoke the name of this god, this particular god or demon, and then you grind up these particular plants into a potion, and you drink it. Well, what we found out, now that we can read the ancient Mesopotamian Sumerian cuneiform, is that these are actually medicinal remedies. So a lot of what we see historically as the idea of demons isn't really something demonic. It's that we as human beings have less understanding. So how does this apply today? What does Kyle do? So as a demonologist, before COVID, I was getting 200 calls a month. Now, thank goodness, that's less than that a lot. I don't take nearly as many calls. But I can tell you just about any day of the week who guest starred on Supernatural reruns Or what movies have what demons on them in the theater right now? Who possessed that Bagans this week? And, you know, the calls are all because people are sensitive to the cultures. So part of my job when I get them is to kind of talk them out. Just a couple days ago, I had a call from a woman, and she started out so nice name, but she was describing what seemed to be a very, very compelling case that she had something terrorizing. And what is I'm going through and vetting her. So the first part is I may spend 2 to 4 hours on the phone with someone in the case where they have a report. And I'll interview them, and I'll get all the facts, and if they've gotten some evidence that they've captured, I'll review that. And then usually if it meets certain criteria, I'll find a local team, because I get called from all over the world. I'll find a local team to go out and try to check them out, just to see what's really going on and try to capture some evidence. So how many of you are paranormal investigators out there? Okay. So I would find a paranormal team and have them go check it out and do certain things as part of the test. And then if it sounds legitimate, I would get on a plane or in a car, or if I can't get to there somewhere because it's too remote or just not possible schedule-wise, I'll get someone to try to assist them. So in this lady's particular case, she reaches out to me, and I start interviewing her. Okay, yep, sounds legit. Until I start asking her questions to kind of determine, okay, well, who have you contacted? And she starts running through a list of television people that she's contacted. I said, okay. And then, who else? What else have you done? Well, I've posted it all on my YouTube page, on my YouTube channel about me being possessed. Okay? As you go through it, you start seeing that there's motivation there other than a real paranormal event occurring. I've dealt with a lot of cases over the years. I've had cases where literally I've been picked up and thrown. When I was much, much younger, I had a particular case where I just about was killed as part of it. And it changed you. And in that particular case where I was almost killed, the young lady had gone to Georgia to Bonaventure Cemetery. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but that's a really cool cemetery in Savannah. It's got a Jewish section and it's got old sections, but it's a Victorian-style cemetery. And in this particular case, the young ladies had gone into the Jewish section and stolen stones off the grave, which is bad, bad karma, if nothing else. They came back home. They were living out of Atlanta or North Atlanta at that point in time. And literally the night they came home, one of the two young ladies went to bed, and that she had locked the door to her room because that was her normal thing. She woke up the next morning and everything that was on her dresser had been shoved to the far edge of the dresser, and a mirror was missing. And she discovered the mirror actually underneath the rug. So for the next few days, that freaked her out, but for the next few days there was intense, what we refer to as telekinetic activity. There was physical objects moving, being manipulated. I came by just to do an initial walkthrough. At that point, didn't know that it was anything demonic. It had strength, but I was new to doing the field work. And it just happened that as I'm doing the walkthrough, literally, I find energy pumps into the side of the building where they are. They're in what used to be an old people's home that's been converted to apartments. And it happens to be that's where the energy for the entire building is pumped in, was at the bedroom for this young lady. And as I start doing it, I carry a bunch of different toys with me to try to detect energy. And you'll see like, I have it out, but I put it up, I guess. You'll see tonight energy detectors. We call them K2s in television. And yeah, you've got one right there. I had some of those because this was years ago, right? But now I've got a new cool super science grade toy. But back then I would set them all around just to try to track something moving. And I could get something seeming to move from one to the next, to the next, to the next. As I started this, it wasn't prepared for an investigation, but I was doing it. I just happened to have some of the toys with me. Was able to actually go into her room where the stuff had been moved, and we had something indent the bed. Literally like someone was sitting on the bed. We were able to get it as the evening progressed. She wanted to sit with it by herself. She did interface with it, which was probably a really bad idea in retrospect. But they still was trying to assess what was going on back then. And in this particular case, we got it to come downstairs, and it would shake the ficus trees. She had these fake ficus trees that were popular. And there was a wind chime, and she had it twirl the wind chime up and let it spin out. So it was really strong. Pretty quickly, the evaluation was, this is not something that's a normal haunting. This is something that is a class higher than that. Something that is definitely a paranormal event. I usually call them paranormal events, not entities. But it's something, a paranormal event's occurring of a high magnitude that could present a threat to you. We started looking at the situations going on. The other girl that lived in the house had been experiencing night terrors for the past, since the trip down to Bonaventure had been experiencing night terrors. She had them historically a long time earlier, but they had subsided before that. And after the trip to the cemetery, they started getting night terrors again. And it seemed that in the subsequent several investigations, that if we didn't know where the entity was, it would always be in that girl's bedroom, where the brass bed was. And I mentioned this at the brass bed. So, one of the days, as this investigation is going on, the girls get into a fight. One leaves, the other one's at home by herself. She goes into the bathroom, closes the door to go to the bathroom. She finishes her business and gets up, and she can't open the door. She pounds on it, she's shoving on it, can't get the door to open. She actually calls me on the phone saying that she's trapped in her own bathroom. And this goes on for about 45 minutes. And then the door just opens. There would be things like when male visitors would come, suddenly things would get kind of shoved their way, accidentally fall in their direction. It was pretty clear that this was a deteriorating event. I made the rookie mistake, because again, this was, for me, I had studied demons since I was 12 years old indirectly. And the actual field work, though, and this was a long time ago now, but the actual field work was new. I knew the theories, I knew what could be used, but I was still learning back then. And in this particular case, I made the rookie mistake of saying, hey, this is dangerous. I think you need to stay out of the house for a while, and I'll work on dealing with it. It attacked me later on that night. And when we talk about the idea of demons and possessions, it's not like this TV show Supernatural. We're not meat sacks. They aren't this dark cloud that slides into our body and takes over. The actual word for that we translate as possession is something called ekbalo. And what it means is to command. So the idea is, what a demon's really doing is it's putting ideas into your mind so that they're your ideas. It's talking to you in your own thoughts. And in my particular case, when it attacked, this was late August, it said, you're cold. It was 100 degrees on average that particular August in Atlanta. And for the next 6 weeks, I was freezing to death. I was wearing a heavy winter jacket, I was wearing blankets. The doctors could find absolutely nothing physically wrong with me. They said, well, this is obviously something psychiatric, but they did all the different tests that way, and I'm like, there's nothing we can find that causes this. So after about 6 weeks, I was out of commission, couldn't do anything. Meanwhile, during that 6-week period, the girls were supposed to, they were going to abandon the place that they were living and move into a house. And I thought that was a great idea because if whatever's there, if it follows you, that tells us something right away, and if it doesn't, again, that tells us something. It just so happened that when the new house, they had planned to do a birthday party for a guy turning 21 years old. And 2 days before they were supposed to move, that house fell through, and they were still stuck in this place that they were renting, and they went ahead and had the kid's birthday party there. In the middle of his own birthday party, he disappeared. They heard a crash upstairs. They went up there. The guy had tied a sheet around his neck and tied it to that same brass bed I mentioned earlier, where it always hung out, and thrown himself out the window. And needless to say, the girls abandoned that house, never went back. So that's a failure on my part. I tell you that because what I deal with on a regular basis is sometimes situations that are very dire. Most of the time, it's people that just seen one too many TV shows. They want the fame or the glory. One of the most famous cases historically, if you go Google it, is there's a little girl named Annalise Michael, and she lived in Germany. You may have seen the movie in America. It was called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And in that particular case, it's a very, very sad case. This girl was raised in a religious family, and they used religion as discipline. If you don't do so-and-so, God will punish you. And it was such to the point where the young lady would literally go and confess to a priest every single day of her life. What you don't hear in like the movie Emily Rose is she began suffering a medical condition called epilepsy, grand mal seizures. One of the side effects to that they didn't understand really well back in the 70s in particular is that you have hallucinations that are part of that. You'll see bright lights. You'll have phantom smells. You'll hear phantom voices. And these are all common symptoms of someone with severe grand mal seizure untreated. At the same time, the book The Exorcist came out. Peter Blatty, a great book, terrifying book that you all probably, most of you probably seen the movie, right? Has anybody not seen the movie? Okay. You are in. So, there was a priest that had read the book and saw how famous this particular book was becoming and wanted to be famous himself. And he heard about this case with Annalise Michael, and he got involved, and he ignored all of the evidence that said it was a medical condition. And the reality was, because of what they did in performing these exorcisms on her, it ended up killing the girl. And you'll see if you actually Googled her, Annalise Michael, the pictures are horrific. Because they got her where she was physically going through an exorcism. Now, when we talk about the idea of exorcism, Catholic book, Exorcism in Latin. The original exorcisms the most common one is the exorcism from 1611. It was revised back in 1998. But the idea is it's basically 25 minutes of prayers by a Catholic priest, and then in between there, they prostrate themselves. That's where you get down on your knees, and then you lay flat on the floor in the form of a cross, and you say, Hail Mary, full of grace, and you do basically a prayer, and then you get up, and then you get down again and do it all over. So this poor girl, they would do these 25-minute exorcisms for 12 hours a day and make her do the prostrating in between them. So what eventually happens is she destroys her kneecaps, and this goes on not for a day, not for 2 days. It's not like in the movies. An exorcism takes weeks or months. So in this particular case, they did the exorcism for almost a year. They destroyed her kneecaps so she couldn't walk, so she would fall and broke her teeth out. That's why the pictures are so horrific. She would not eat because one, the teeth were the problem, and two, they told her she needed to fast. So basically, they ended up killing this girl. So that's the kind of situation that we deal with when we're talking about demons and demonic. So I gave you both examples. her case, she was not possessed. There was nothing demonic going on, despite the horrible pictures you may see on the internet. And there's even copies of some of her audio that was submitted to the court out there that people doctored up and put creepy music and stuff behind. But the reality is, it's just a really sick girl that they kept from getting medical treatment. So when someone calls me up and says, I've got a demon, that's what I have to face. I have to try to figure out what's the truth. And I tell everybody, and I say this all the time, my job as a demonologist, and anybody's job as a paranormal investigator, is to find the truth. I don't care what the truth is. We just have to find it. I spent years in office. Like I said, I've been investigating foreign religions or ancient religions since I was 12. I've traveled the world doing this. I've been doing paranormal investigation for a very, very long time. And I never, when I'm doing it, I don't charge anybody anything, and it's all on my dime. So I've spent an incredible amount of time and money over the years doing it. But I would be just as happy tomorrow to find out that all of this paranormal stuff is complete bunk, and here's the simple solution. Science has the answer, science has figured it out, and you've wasted your time. I would be equally happy to have the exact opposite answer. Tomorrow to find out, hey, we understand that the science isn't there, but there is this amazing supernatural element, and now we can prove it. I would be just as happy with that answer, or even if it's somewhere in between. Because to me, it's the truth that matters. When I'm writing a book, so the last book I did was on demons. And it was because people would call and say, hey, God, so-and-so says they're possessed by this demon. They said that they've been playing with a Ouija board, and Zozos possess them. Well, I want to just mention, when someone says that Zozos possess them, first of all, Zozo is a completely made-up demon. There's only one mention of Zozo historically, and if you actually read it, it's a French report from a priest. If you actually read it in the French, it actually says, this lady is insane, and she's been making up, this is her 30th possession, allegedly, and she's made up these demons. But the reason when we hear Zozo, so if I am used to blindly moving, they call it a planchette, thing you move on the Ouija board, what's at the extremes? Z, O, C, O. It's just someone moving it back and forth. So if you're doing it blind, it's actually really super easy. And we actually find that, I'll give you a secret. Someone says, hi, I'm possessed by Zozo. Okay, we're going to do a quick test. We're going to blindfold you because you don't need to see the board, right? And Zozo, if he's the one controlling you, can. So while they're blindfolded, I turn the board over. Okay, let's have Zozo tell us who his name is. M-A-M-A, Mama. So, that's the kind of thing we do. You never trust a demonologist. But, that's the thing. We live in a world where pop culture controls us, right? And we don't sometimes dwell down on the history. We don't understand what the components are. So that's what I do. And I know I've rambled a lot. Earlier tonight, I was answering some people's questions. Are there any just general questions anybody has? Or did I put you all to sleep? I know it's getting late for some of y'all. My bedtime is like 10 minutes from now. Are there any questions I can answer or try to? No? Okay. Well, very good. I will say that, one of the good things about Ghost Hunt weekends and this location, and part of the reason I'm involved with it, is because they have that same kind of commitment to truth. I also make sure that when we go to a location, that location is safe. So for those of you who've never done a paranormal investigation or never done a ghost hunt, there's absolutely nothing later on tonight to worry about. And what's going to be really cool tonight is we have really small groups, and so that's going to be cool, and we're going to get some, hopefully some good stuff, and we'll all be able to participate in all of that. And I think, anything else you want me to say, Chad, or?
No, I don't know. I was just like so fascinated with all this. He always has good stories and good lectures. So, no, I'm excited to kind of get going. I was waiting for it to get dark, and now it is, and the atmosphere is starting to change already. So, we'll give everybody a few more minutes. We'll take a little break. Now, I do have some waters downstairs. I know everybody's probably thirsty or something, but let me go down to the car. I got a big case of water. Give you guys that. I'll take it outside for you guys. I know some of you smoke and stuff. So we'll just take a little break. We're going to break some of this stuff down, so we're going to be taking that outside.